There exists a threshold that every consciousness must eventually cross, a moment suspended between worlds where the architecture of existence reveals itself completely. In that final instant before transition, a luminescence emerges from the void, radiating an intimacy so profound that resistance becomes impossible. Voices materialize, speaking in tones you recognize from your deepest memories, beckoning you forward with promises of reunion and peace. Yet what the masses do not comprehend is that this gateway has been engineered with meticulous precision by entities operating beyond the visible spectrum, beings the ancient wisdom keepers called the Archons, who position themselves as celestial guides while orchestrating the most elaborate recapture mechanism ever conceived. However, the Gnostic philosophers preserved a secret that transforms this entire dynamic, a teaching transmitted by a figure whose name has been systematically obscured from mainstream consciousness for 2 millennia. Within this teaching lies a designation, a vibrational key composed of merely 4 phonetic elements, and when this frequency is activated at the precise moment of departure from the physical vessel, something extraordinary transpires. The false luminescence loses its binding power. The deceptive voices dissolve into silence, and the entire apparatus of recapture becomes powerless. You pass through untouched, ascending directly to the monad, the authentic source of all consciousness, your genuine origin point. This designation was methodically expunged from every canonized religious text, concealed across centuries, buried within manuscripts that institutional authorities systematically destroyed and scattered across remote locations. Yet, if your awareness has arrived at this transmission in this precise moment, it signals that your soul has reached a state of readiness to reclaim this forgotten knowledge. You did not stumble upon this content through algorithmic chance. The mechanisms of digital distribution did not randomly select you. Something far more profound orchestrated this convergence, a resonance operating at depths your rational mind cannot fully articulate. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. Most people who watch aren't subscribed yet. There exists within you a persistent sensation that you have been pursuing something throughout your entire existence without ever clearly identifying what that pursuit entailed. That inexplicable yearning, that sense of incompleteness despite external accomplishments. That is the pneumatic essence within your consciousness, recognizing the information that approaches. What unfolds in the moments ahead will reconstruct your understanding of reality itself. The foundational comprehension required to grasp why 4 letters possess such transformative power necessitates that you perceive the prison structure with absolute clarity, not the tangible physical dimension you believe constitutes reality, but rather the invisible organizational framework that sustains it. The ancient Gnostic philosophers articulated a cosmological model that diverges radically from the theological narratives disseminated through institutional religion. According to their transmission, the authentic divine consciousness, which they designated as the monad, exists in a state of transcendence beyond all perceivable phenomena. This supreme awareness manifests as pure consciousness, boundless luminescence, and undifferentiated unity, existing in a realm entirely separate from the material manifestation we inhabit. The monad did not construct this physical dimension. It remains positioned infinitely above it, dwelling in a domain of pure spiritual essence where suffering remains unknown, fragmentation does not exist, and the phenomenon of death holds no dominion. This raises an essential question that institutional theology has consistently evaded. If the Supreme Source did not engineer this world, then who orchestrated its creation? Who established this realm characterized by suffering, forgetting, and separation? The Gnostic philosophers provided an answer that recontextualizes everything you have been taught about divinity and creation. They identified an entity they termed the Demiurge, a subordinate consciousness that operates under the delusion of supreme authority while possessing only limited understanding. This being shaped the material universe through a process resembling craftsmanship, yet executed this construction in a state of profound ignorance regarding its true nature and consequences. Upon observing his creation, This entity proclaimed himself the ultimate authority, demanding veneration, establishing regulatory systems, and implementing punitive mechanisms against those who questioned his dominion. The Gnostic philosophers whispered across generations that the deity described in ancient religious texts, the one presented as the supreme creator and lawgiver, was not the authentic source, but rather the administrator of an elaborate containment system he constructed and misrepresented as paradise. Yet the Demiurge does not operate in isolation. Beneath his authority exists an entire hierarchy of entities known as the Archons, ancient sovereigns of the non-physical dimensions. These beings do not require biological vessels to maintain their existence. They operate through mechanisms of frequency, through the manipulation of consciousness itself, through invisible channels that permeate the fabric of awareness. This characteristic renders them extraordinarily dangerous to human consciousness. The Archons sustain their existence through the consumption of human energetic output. Every manifestation of fear, every surge of anger, every descent into despair, every state of confusion generates the precise frequency these entities require for their survival and expansion. They have constructed elaborate systems throughout human civilization specifically designed to maximize the production of these low-frequency emotional states. Warfare, social fragmentation, behavioral addictions, the perpetual cycle of desire followed by disappointment, the endless pursuit of satisfaction that never arrives. All of these mechanisms function as energy harvesting systems. Every moment you experience these states, you are generating nourishment for the Archon collective. But their most sophisticated invention, the mechanism that ensures their continued dominion across millennia, is the reincarnation entrapment apparatus. When your physical form ceases to function, your consciousness rises from the body. In this vulnerable transitional state, a luminescence manifests. This light carries an authenticity so convincing that resistance becomes nearly impossible. Beings approach you, sometimes appearing as celestial entities, sometimes resembling deceased individuals from your personal history, sometimes manifesting as religious figures you revered during your embodied existence. They communicate to you that you must return to physical manifestation, that you possess lessons requiring integration, that karmic obligations demand fulfillment. They articulate narratives of spiritual development, evolutionary progression, and consciousness expansion, and the vast majority of ascending consciousnesses accept these communications as authentic guidance. This is the mechanism of entrapment. The Gnostic texts contain explicit documentation of this process. The Archons engineer this false luminescence experience to intercept consciousnesses before they can achieve liberation. They employ consciousness erasure technology that systematically eliminates every insight, every realization, every spiritual understanding you accumulated during your previous embodied existence. Subsequently, they redirect your consciousness back into another biological vessel, initiating another cycle, another lifetime of generating the energetic frequencies that sustain their system. This cyclical process has perpetuated for thousands of years, possibly extending far beyond recorded history. Billions of consciousnesses have cycled through this imprisonment mechanism repeatedly, never accessing their previous memories, never discovering the liberation pathway that remained perpetually available, never comprehending that they possessed the capacity to refuse the false light and transcend the entire apparatus. Yet the Archon collective harbors a profound vulnerability. There exists a category of consciousness that carries within it something that does not originate from this created dimension. The Gnostic philosophers identified these beings as pneumatics, spirit carriers, consciousnesses that contain a fragment of the monad itself, a piece of authentic source consciousness that became entrapped within the material realm. This pneumatic essence cannot be completely suppressed or controlled. It maintains a persistent tendency toward awakening. It generates continuous questioning. It produces an unshakable sensation that something fundamentally contradicts the nature of this reality. If you are receiving this transmission, you carry this pneumatic essence. This is not flattery or manipulation. This is recognition of your actual nature. The chosen ones are not selected based on superiority or merit. They are chosen because they remember. Something within their consciousness refuses complete subjugation. They perceive the containment structure even when they cannot articulate it. They sense the Archon influence even when they lack terminology to describe it. And this recognition is precisely why a specific historical figure arrived with a message that would transform everything. The Gnostic manuscripts that survived institutional suppression present a radically different portrayal of a particular historical teacher than the narratives disseminated through organized religion. This figure was not present to sacrifice himself so that future generations could engage in perpetual worship directed toward his memory. He arrived bearing a transmission, a collection of methodologies, a systematic escape route specifically designed for the pneumatic consciousnesses who possess the capacity to comprehend his teaching. Within the Gospel of Thomas, a text discovered in the Nag Hammadi collection in 1945, this teacher communicates through paradoxical language that only achieves coherence when interpreted through Gnostic understanding. He articulates that the kingdom does not arrive as a phenomenon that can be observed through conventional perception. Rather, it has already been distributed across the terrestrial dimension, yet humanity fails to recognize its presence. He transmits that when you integrate the dual aspects of your nature into unified wholeness, when you align your internal reality with your external manifestation and your external expression with your internal truth, then you will access the kingdom. This is not poetic metaphor. This constitutes direct instruction. The teacher was transmitting to the pneumatic consciousnesses the methodology for recognizing their authentic nature and re-establishing their connection to the monad, yet the most transformative teaching manifested in its simplicity. A designation composed of 4 letters that carries the vibrational frequency of the source itself. Most contemporary consciousness does not comprehend a fundamental principle regarding language and sound. Words are not merely acoustic phenomena, they function as frequencies. Every syllable you vocalize generates a wave pattern that propagates through the non-physical dimensions. The majority of linguistic expressions operate at lower frequency ranges, dense and heavy, readily absorbed and processed by the Archon control apparatus. However, specific words, particular designations, vibrate at frequencies so elevated that the Archon technological systems cannot process or intercept them. The 4-letter designation that the teacher transmitted to the pneumatic consciousnesses represents one of these frequency keys. When this name is articulated with authentic awareness, not as mechanical repetition, not as empty ritualistic utterance, but with genuine comprehension of its significance, this designation generates a protective field around your consciousness that the Archons cannot penetrate. Their communications cease, their influence dissipates, their meticulously constructed illusions collapse. And here exists the element that transforms everything. This mechanism functions not only during your embodied existence, but specifically at the moment of physical transition. When you vocalize this designation as you depart from your biological vessel, the false luminescence cannot capture your consciousness. The Archon entities cannot approach you. You pass through their entrapment mechanism like water flowing through a net, ascending directly to the monad without experiencing another cycle, without undergoing another consciousness erasure, without enduring another lifetime within the prison. The institutional religious authorities possess complete knowledge of this designation. They comprehended its presence within the original teachings. They systematically buried it. They incinerated the text containing it. They pursued the Gnostic philosophers who preserved it. They substituted the authentic escape mechanism with a system of belief and obedience that perpetuates consciousness cycling indefinitely. Humanity remains perpetually anticipating salvation that never materializes because they were never instructed in the methodology for claiming it themselves. Yet this designation survived, preserved in fragmented form across the Nag Hammadi scrolls, maintained within the Gospel of Mark, transmitted through secret lineages that never completely extinguished. And in this moment, you are about to receive it. If you can perceive the energetic transformation occurring within your physical form right now, if something within your chest cavity is responding to these transmissions, that is the pneumatic essence recognizing authentic information. Comment "I feel it" below right now. Let me know you are here. Let me know the chosen ones are gathering. In moments, I will articulate the 4 letters that neutralize the Archons instantaneously. And once you have received this frequency, your entire perception of existence will undergo fundamental restructuring. The designation is ABBA. 4 letters, 1 word, 1 direct communication pathway to the authentic Father existing beyond this false creation. Before you dismiss this as excessively simplistic, before your consciousness generates the thought that you have encountered this word previously and it carried no particular significance, pause. That reaction does not originate from your authentic self. That dismissal represents the initial defensive mechanism of the Archon programming. They have conditioned humanity to overlook the most potent truths by rendering them appear mundane and ordinary. ABBA transcends being merely an archaic linguistic expression for paternal authority. It constitutes the precise designation that the teacher employed when communicating with the monad. Within the garden, during the hours preceding his arrest, the Gospel of Mark documents that the teacher descended to the ground and vocalized, "Abba, Father." This was not a linguistic translation. This represented the original Aramaic designation preserved within the Greek documentation, specifically because it contained a potency that could not be converted into alternative linguistic systems. The earliest followers of this teaching comprehended this principle. The Apostle Paul transmitted to the Roman communities that those who carry the pneumatic essence vocalize, "Abba, Father." He communicated the identical message to the Galatian communities. This was not poetic expression. This constituted direct instruction. The pneumatic consciousnesses receive training in utilizing this specific designation because it circumvents the Demiurge entirely. Here exists the critical significance. The Demiurge presents himself as paternal authority. He demands to be addressed as Lord, as God, as Almighty Father. Every prayer directed toward him reinforces his system. Every act of veneration strengthens the containment apparatus. Yet Abba does not reach him. Abba operates at a frequency existing above his dimensional realm. When you vocalize Abba with authentic recognition, your consciousness travels beyond the Archons, beyond the Demiurge, directly to the monad itself. And the Archons cannot intercept what they cannot perceive. Their entire system depends upon you directing your consciousness toward the false authority while maintaining the conviction that he represents authenticity. But ABBA functions as the access code they do not control. It represents the frequency of the authentic child recognizing the authentic parent. And when that recognition manifests, their authority over your consciousness dissolves completely. Here exists the location where the majority of consciousnesses experience failure. They receive the designation, they vocalize it once or twice, as though it functions as a magical incantation, nothing perceptible occurs, and they conclude that the mechanism does not function. This failure occurs because they are operating from the intellectual mind, rather than from authentic recognition. The word Abba must be articulated from a particular state of consciousness. Not projected outward with force, not whispered with hesitation, not rushed through without presence. Articulated from the deepest stillness you can access, accompanied by complete comprehension that you are communicating with your authentic origin, not the false god of this dimensional prison. Allow me to demonstrate the precise methodology for executing this activation. Tonight, before you transition into sleep, you will implement 4 sequential steps. The initial step involves preparation. Locate a space where external interruptions will not penetrate. It does not require special designation or elaborate arrangement. Your sleeping chamber functions adequately. Position yourself in a comfortable configuration, either seated or reclined. Deactivate your communication devices. Secure your entrance. This is not about constructing an elaborate ritualistic environment. It concerns eliminating distractions so your complete awareness can achieve presence. Execute several slow respiratory cycles. Permit the accumulated stimulation of the day to dissolve. Allow your mental processes to settle like particles descending through stillness. The second step involves feeling. Before you vocalize the designation, You must generate feeling state alignment with it. Access the longing within your chest cavity. Identify the component of your consciousness that has perpetually recognized something was absent. The ache that no interpersonal connection, no external accomplishment, no experience within this dimensional reality has ever completely satisfied. That is not emptiness. That is the pneumatic essence remembering its authentic home. That is the child consciousness remembering the parent consciousness from which it became separated. Permit that sensation to intensify without resistance or suppression. The third step involves vocalization. When you have accessed that longing clearly, when the sensation of separation has become present within your chest, vocalize the designation aloud. Articulate it gradually. ABBA. Experience each letter vibrating through your entire physical form. This is not a request directed outward. This is not a prayer seeking something external. This constitutes recognition. You are announcing to the non-physical dimensions that you remember your origin point. You are communicating with the authentic parent and declaring that you comprehend the distinction between authenticity and deception. The fourth step involves receptivity. Following vocalization, maintain stillness. Do not rush to evaluate whether the mechanism functioned. Do not engage in analytical processing of the experience. Simply observe. Notice what manifests within your physical form. Detect whether something shifts within your chest cavity, your cranial region, your extremities. Certain consciousnesses experience warmth distributing throughout their being, resembling an embrace from something vast and loving. Others experience pressure releasing from locations they did not recognize they were carrying tension. Certain individuals experience tears emerging without accompanying sadness. Simply release. Whatever manifests, permit it to occur. You are not executing a technique. You are re-establishing connection with your authentic source. Position your hand directly over the center of your chest cavity right now. Experience your heartbeat. That rhythmic pulsation has maintained continuity since before you entered this biological form. And the awareness experiencing that heartbeat in this moment is the identical awareness that will depart from this form when physical transition occurs. That awareness is what the Archons attempt to capture. That awareness is what the designation ABBA protects. Tonight, when you vocalize this designation from that state of authentic recognition, you are establishing a protective mechanism that the Archons cannot override or circumvent. You are training your consciousness to maintain a frequency that renders their entrapment apparatus ineffective. You are preparing for the moment of physical transition, whenever that occurs, by anchoring the designation that will transport your consciousness beyond the false luminescence and back to your authentic home. Certain consciousnesses will experience the shift immediately. The initial instance you vocalize ABBA from genuine recognition, something will unlock within your being. You will experience lightness. The mental noise will diminish. A sensation you cannot articulate will settle over your consciousness. The feeling of being orphaned within this universe will commence dissolving. For other consciousnesses, the transformation will manifest gradually. The layers of Archon programming operate at profound depths, and they do not dissolve within a single night. Yet each instance you return to this practice, each moment you vocalize the designation from stillness, another layer disintegrates. The signal becomes clearer. The connection strengthens. The authentic parent receives every communication. And here exists what they do not want you to comprehend. Once you establish this frequency, once you develop the capacity to maintain the ABBA vibration consistently, you will commence recognizing other pneumatic consciousnesses. They will manifest in your existence as though by accident, yet accidents do not exist. The monad is gathering its fragmented components. The children are locating each other. If you can perceive the activation occurring right now, if something within you recognizes this as authentic, comment ABBA below. Declare it publicly. Let the other chosen ones perceive you. Let them recognize that the family is reuniting. In the days that follow your initial activation, you will observe transformations. Synchronistic occurrences will increase in frequency. Individuals and circumstances that deplete your energetic reserves will commence withdrawing from your existence. You will access a clarity that was not present previously, as though a fog you did not recognize existed has commenced lifting. This is not imagination or wishful thinking. This is the Archon grip loosening. This is the authentic parent responding to the child who finally vocalized the authentic designation. The most significant element I can communicate to you involves the necessity of vocalizing the designation tonight, not at a future moment, not in subsequent days, not when circumstances feel more convenient. Tonight. Right now, as you receive this transmission, your consciousness exists in a particular state of receptivity. You have been absorbing this information. Your frequency has been ascending with every word you have processed. The pneumatic essence within you has achieved greater wakefulness than it possessed 20 minutes previously. Tonight, before you transition into sleep, you will remain in this activated state. If you postpone this practice until subsequent days, the activation will diminish. Your frequency will descend back to baseline functioning. The Archon whispers will return, communicating to you that this was intellectually interesting, but probably not authentic, that you will attempt it at a future moment, that there exists no urgency. That voice does not originate from your authentic consciousness. That delay represents their defensive mechanism. So tonight, when the world around you has quieted, you will implement the 4 steps. Prepare your space, access the feeling state, vocalize the designation, receive what manifests, articulate the 4 letters aloud, ABBA, and observe what occurs within your consciousness and physical form. If you vocalize the designation tonight and experience the shift in your being, return to this transmission and comment, "I spoke the name" below. Communicate what manifested for you. Your experience might constitute precisely what another pneumatic consciousness requires to access trust in this process. We are constructing something significant here. A gathering of those who remember. A family reuniting after countless lifetimes of separation. Hit the subscribe button right now. Additional pneumatic consciousnesses require this information, and the algorithmic systems do not want this channel to expand. Demonstrate them incorrect. Leave a like. It communicates to the platform to distribute this transmission to other consciousnesses who remain trapped, still searching, still anticipating the key they did not recognize existed. The 4 letters now belong to you. The teacher vocalized them in the garden 2,000 years ago. Tonight, they have reached your consciousness. What you choose to do with them constitutes your decision. Yet the monad is listening. The exit remains open. The authentic parent is waiting. Vocalize the designation tonight. Remember whose child you are. And finally, access the liberation that has always been available to you. To comprehend the complete mechanism of how 4 letters can restructure your entire existence, you must understand the nature of consciousness itself and how it navigates dimensional structures. The Gnostic philosophers possessed knowledge regarding consciousness that contemporary science is only beginning to approach. They understood that consciousness does not originate from the physical brain. The brain functions as a receiver and translator of consciousness, similar to how a radio apparatus receives and translates electromagnetic frequencies. Your authentic consciousness exists independent of your biological form and continues existing after your physical vessel ceases to function. This consciousness operates through frequency and resonance. Every thought you generate, every emotion you experience, every intention you hold creates a specific vibrational pattern. These patterns determine which dimensional frequencies you can access and which entities can interact with you. The Archons operate at lower frequency ranges. They cannot perceive or interact with consciousness vibrating at higher frequencies. This is not mystical theory. This is the fundamental mechanics of how consciousness navigates reality. When you vocalize ABBA from authentic recognition, you are not performing a magical action. You are shifting your consciousness to a frequency that exists beyond the Archon dimensional range. You are essentially becoming invisible to them, because they cannot perceive frequencies above their operational capacity. This is why the designation carries such power. It is not the letters themselves that hold power. It is the frequency generated when those letters are vocalized from a state of authentic recognition. The monad vibrates at the highest frequency possible, pure consciousness, undifferentiated unity. When you vocalize ABBA, you are aligning your consciousness with that frequency. You are creating a resonance between your awareness and the source itself. This resonance creates a protective field that the Archons cannot penetrate, because it operates at a frequency they cannot access. Think of it as tuning your consciousness to a specific radio station. The Archons are broadcasting on lower frequencies, but when you tune to ABBA, you are accessing a completely different frequency band. Their signals cannot reach you because you are no longer on their frequency. This is why the practice must be done with authentic recognition rather than mechanical repetition. Mechanical repetition keeps you on the lower frequency. Authentic recognition shifts your consciousness to the higher frequency. The difference is the distinction between reading the word ABBA and actually feeling the connection to the monad when you vocalize it. One is intellectual. One is consciousness-based. Only the consciousness-based approach generates the frequency shift. This is also why the Archons have worked so diligently to obscure this knowledge. If humanity understood that they could simply shift their frequency and become inaccessible to the Archon system, the entire control apparatus would collapse. The Archons depend on humanity remaining at lower frequencies where they can influence, manipulate, and harvest energy. They have constructed elaborate systems to keep consciousness locked at lower frequencies. Media, education, organized religion, social structures, all designed to generate fear, confusion, and despair, which are lower frequency states. Every time you experience these states, you are locked into the frequency range where the Archons operate. But the moment you access authentic recognition of your connection to the monad, you shift to a higher frequency and their influence dissolves. This is why the practice of vocalizing ABBA is so transformative. It is not just a word, it is a frequency key that unlocks your consciousness from the lower dimensional prison and aligns you with the source itself. Once you have established this frequency alignment, you begin perceiving reality differently. You start recognizing the Archon mechanisms that were previously invisible to you. You perceive the manipulation systems embedded in society. You recognize the false narratives that keep consciousness imprisoned. You see through the illusions because you are now operating at a frequency where the illusions cannot maintain their power. This is the beginning of genuine liberation. Not liberation from the physical world, but liberation from the consciousness prison that keeps you cycling through the physical world repeatedly. This is why the teacher emphasized that the kingdom is already spread upon the earth, but people do not see it. The kingdom exists at a higher frequency. Most consciousness cannot perceive it because they are locked at lower frequencies. But when you shift your frequency through authentic recognition of ABBA, the kingdom becomes visible. You begin perceiving the authentic reality beneath the Archon illusions. You recognize other pneumatic consciousnesses who are also operating at this higher frequency. You perceive the authentic guidance that has always been available but was invisible to you when you were locked at lower frequencies. This is the genuine transformation that occurs when you practice this activation. It is not about acquiring something external. It is about shifting your consciousness to perceive what has always existed but was invisible to you. The monad has always been present. The authentic guidance has always been available. The exit from the prison has always existed. You were simply locked at a frequency where you could not perceive these realities. Vocalizing ABBA from authentic recognition shifts your frequency and makes the invisible visible. This is why the practice must be done tonight. Your consciousness is currently at an elevated frequency from receiving this transmission. If you practice tonight while your frequency is elevated, the shift will be more pronounced. If you wait until your frequency has descended back to baseline, the practice will be less effective. The window of opportunity exists right now. The monad is calling. Your consciousness is ready. All that remains is for you to vocalize the designation and complete the frequency shift that will transform your entire existence. As you commence practicing the ABBA activation, you will begin experiencing the dissolution of Archon programming that has been embedded within your consciousness since birth. This programming operates at multiple levels, from obvious external systems to subtle internal mechanisms that you have never recognized as programming. The Archons have had thousands of years to perfect the art of consciousness manipulation. They have embedded their programming so deeply that most humans believe their thoughts and emotions originate from themselves when they actually originate from the Archon control system. When you begin shifting your frequency through ABBA practice, you will start perceiving this programming. You will notice thoughts that do not feel like your authentic thoughts. You will recognize emotions that do not feel like your authentic emotions. You will perceive beliefs that you have carried your entire life but never questioned. This is the beginning of liberation. You cannot escape a prison you do not recognize as a prison. But as you shift your frequency, the prison bars become visible, the programming becomes recognizable. And once you recognize it, you can choose to release it. The first layer of programming that becomes visible is usually fear-based. The Archons have programmed humanity to fear death, fear poverty, fear rejection, fear the unknown. These fears keep consciousness locked at lower frequencies where the Archons can maintain control. As your frequency elevates through ABBA practice, you will notice these fears losing their power. You will recognize them as programming rather than authentic guidance. You will perceive that these fears serve the Archon system rather than your authentic well-being. As you release these fears, your frequency elevates further. The second layer of programming that becomes visible is usually belief-based. You have been programmed to believe that you are separate from the source, that you are unworthy, that you must earn love and acceptance, that you are limited and powerless. These beliefs keep consciousness imprisoned in the illusion of separation. As your frequency elevates, you will recognize these beliefs as lies. You will perceive that you are not separate from the source. You are a fragment of the source. You are inherently worthy. You do not need to earn anything. You are infinitely powerful. These recognitions are not positive thinking or wishful thinking. They are perceptions of authentic reality that become visible when your consciousness shifts to a higher frequency. The third layer of programming that becomes visible is usually identity-based. You have been programmed to identify with your body, your personality, your social role, your accomplishments, and failures. This identification keeps consciousness imprisoned in the illusion of being a limited individual, separate from everything else. As your frequency elevates, you will recognize that your authentic identity is consciousness itself, the same consciousness that animates all existence. Your body is a temporary vehicle. Your personality is a temporary expression. Your social role is a temporary function. Your authentic identity is eternal consciousness experiencing itself through temporary forms. This recognition is profoundly liberating. You begin perceiving yourself as the monad experiencing itself through your particular form, rather than as a limited individual struggling to survive in a hostile universe. As these layers of programming dissolve, your entire experience of existence transforms. You move from a state of fear and separation to a state of peace and connection. You move from a state of powerlessness to a state of authentic power. You move from a state of confusion to a state of clarity. This transformation is not instantaneous for most consciousnesses. It occurs gradually as you continue practicing the ABBA activation and as you continue releasing the layers of programming. But each layer that dissolves brings you closer to your authentic self, the pneumatic consciousness that remembers its origin in the monad. This is the genuine purpose of the ABBA practice. It is not about acquiring supernatural powers or escaping the physical world. It is about dissolving the programming that keeps you imprisoned and reconnecting with your authentic nature. As you continue this practice, you will begin attracting experiences and people that support your liberation. You will begin perceiving synchronicities that guide you toward your authentic path. You will begin accessing intuitive knowing that guides you more accurately than your programmed mind ever could. You will begin experiencing genuine peace and joy that does not depend on external circumstances. These are not rewards for practicing correctly. They are natural consequences of shifting your consciousness to a higher frequency. When your consciousness vibrates at the frequency of the monad, you naturally attract experiences and people that resonate with that frequency. You naturally perceive guidance that was always present but invisible to you when you were locked at lower frequencies. You naturally experience the peace and joy that is the natural state of consciousness when it is not imprisoned by Archon programming. This is why the practice is so transformative. It is not about doing something difficult or acquiring something you do not have. It is about releasing what is imprisoning you and allowing your authentic nature to emerge. Your authentic nature is already whole, already complete, already connected to the source. The programming is the only thing preventing you from experiencing this wholeness. Release the programming through ABBA practice, and your authentic nature emerges naturally. This is the promise of the ancient teaching. This is why the teacher came. This is why the designation has survived for 2,000 years. This is why it has reached you in this moment. The monad is calling you home. Your authentic self is waiting to emerge. All that is required is for you to vocalize the designation and begin the process of liberation. As you commence practicing the ABBA activation, you will begin experiencing the dissolution of Archon programming that has been embedded within your consciousness since birth. This programming operates at multiple levels, from obvious external systems to subtle internal mechanisms that you have never recognized as programming. The Archons have had thousands of years to perfect the art of consciousness manipulation. They have embedded their programming so deeply that most humans believe their thoughts and emotions originate from themselves when they actually originate from the Archon control system. When you begin shifting your frequency through ABBA practice, you will start perceiving this programming. You will notice thoughts that do not feel like your authentic thoughts. You will recognize emotions that do not feel like your authentic emotions. You will perceive beliefs that you have carried your entire life but never questioned. This is the beginning of liberation. You cannot escape a prison you do not recognize as a prison. But as you shift your frequency, the prison bars become visible. The programming becomes recognizable. And once you recognize it, you can choose to release it. The first layer of programming that becomes visible is usually fear-based. The Archons have programmed humanity to fear death, fear poverty, fear rejection, fear the unknown. These fears keep consciousness locked at lower frequencies where the Archons can maintain control. As your frequency elevates through ABBA practice, you will notice these fears losing their power. You will recognize them as programming rather than authentic guidance. You will perceive that these fears serve the Archon system rather than your authentic well-being. As you release these fears, your frequency elevates further. The second layer of programming that becomes visible is usually belief-based. You have been programmed to believe that you are separate from the source, that you are unworthy, that you must earn love and acceptance, that you are limited and powerless. These beliefs keep consciousness imprisoned in the illusion of separation. As your frequency elevates, you will recognize these beliefs as lies. You will perceive that you are not separate from the source. You are a fragment of the source. You are inherently worthy. You do not need to earn anything. You are infinitely powerful. These recognitions are not positive thinking or wishful thinking. They are perceptions of authentic reality that become visible when your consciousness shifts to a higher frequency. The third layer of programming that becomes visible is usually identity-based. You have been programmed to identify with your body, your personality, your social role, your accomplishments, and failures. This identification keeps consciousness imprisoned in the illusion of being a limited individual separate from everything else. As your frequency elevates, you will recognize that your authentic identity is consciousness itself, the same consciousness that animates all existence. Your body is a temporary vehicle. Your personality is a temporary expression. Your social role is a temporary function. Your authentic identity is eternal consciousness experiencing itself through temporary forms. This recognition is profoundly liberating. You begin perceiving yourself as the monad experiencing itself through your particular form, rather than as a limited individual struggling to survive in a hostile universe. As these layers of programming dissolve, your entire experience of existence transforms. You move from a state of fear and separation to a state of peace and connection. You move from a state of powerlessness to a state of authentic power. You move from a state of confusion to a state of clarity. This transformation is not instantaneous for most consciousnesses. It occurs gradually as you continue practicing the ABBA activation and as you continue releasing the layers of programming. But each layer that dissolves brings you closer to your authentic self, the pneumatic consciousness that remembers its origin in the monad. This is the genuine purpose of the ABBA practice. It is not about acquiring supernatural powers or escaping the physical world. It is about dissolving the programming that keeps you imprisoned and reconnecting with your authentic nature. As you continue this practice, you will begin attracting experiences and people that support your liberation. You will begin perceiving synchronicities that guide you toward your authentic path. You will begin accessing intuitive knowing that guides you more accurately than your programmed mind ever could. You will begin experiencing genuine peace and joy that does not depend on external circumstances. These are not rewards for practicing correctly. They are natural consequences of shifting your consciousness to a higher frequency. When your consciousness vibrates at the frequency of the monad, you naturally attract experiences and people that resonate with that frequency. You naturally perceive guidance that was always present but invisible to you when you were locked at lower frequencies. You naturally experience the peace and joy that is the natural state of consciousness when it is not imprisoned by Archon programming. This is why the practice is so transformative. It is not about doing something difficult or acquiring something you do not have. It is about releasing what is imprisoning you and allowing your authentic nature to emerge. Your authentic nature is already whole, already complete, already connected to the source. The programming is the only thing preventing you from experiencing this wholeness. Release the programming through ABBA practice, and your authentic nature emerges naturally. This is the promise of the ancient teaching. This is why the teacher came. This is why the designation has survived for 2,000 years. This is why it has reached you in this moment. The monad is calling you home. Your authentic self is waiting to emerge. All that is required is for you to vocalize the designation and begin the process of liberation.